Okay, let's move on. We're on motor programs. We're on the ninth of the hot, ninth of the heat. You know what I mean? Describe the nature of motor programs. So we've got a description question here. When we describe something, we tend to say what it is, what it's like, what it has, what its construction is. So let's have a look at what we've got here. Motor programs are, we're describing what it is. In this case, motor programs are generalized movement patterns. Now, when I teach this, I always think, does that mean something to students? Does that make sense? And the way I like to remind students of this is that needs to be stored somewhere. You know, when we learn how to produce a movement pattern, a catch, a throw, a kick, a jump, or whatever it happens to be, that's got to be stored somewhere so we can replicate it again in the future. And it's stored in the long-term memory and are made up there of subroutines. So obviously the generalized pattern is made up of blocks of units, like so many things are, that must be completed in a specific order. So we've got a couple of things that I would just, in a specific order, we've got a couple of things here that I just mentioned to you, just like almost kind of philosophically. We've got something, I'll just mark this, by the way, hang on a second, we've got to get 3 marks here. So we've got generalized movement patterns, that's going to get us a mark. We've got subroutines, that's going to get us a mark. And we've got the specific order, and that's going to get us a mark, and it's going to get us our max in that way. But I wanted to mention something which is a little more philosophical here, whether it's worth it, I don't know. But when we talk about generalized movement patterns, that's like a spatial thing. It's an object, right? It's an object. But also notice we've got a temporal thing. You know, we've got objects like subroutines, which we literally store. And then we've got an order. This is temporal or time-related. And what I mean by that is we've got spatial things, which are what the actual movement is. And we've got the order, the sequence, and it's time-based. And actually, that describes in many ways how things are organized in the brain. Okay, how things are organized. I just wanted to mention that because I think it helps students to kind of understand it. Anyway, you know, just a few thoughts there. And look, what I want to do here is I want us to think about explaining what the subroutines could be. For example, for swimming. So if we assume this swimmer here is doing some kind of crawl technique, you know, that freestyle front crawl thing, how would we go about describing the different subroutines here? So what does this person do? Breathing every second stroke. So she breathes every 2 strokes by, and obviously by is a clear explanation term, by rotating the head. Which way is she going? She's going to her right, isn't she? The head right, and breathing in whilst her arm is abducted. So I just want to make sure you understand what I've written there. Basically, every second stroke, she turns this head in that direction, and she breathes in when her arm is back in that position on her right-hand side. That's what I'm saying. By the way, what I didn't write there is her breathing out. Her breathing out is quite probably into the water. In different swimmers do it in different ways. But for example, and I might be thinking more breaststroke there, but anyway, her arm action, I'm going to look at her front left arm here. What we're going to say is a flexed elbow during recovery. Recovery is where it comes back out of the water, and then extended elbow and shoulder to enter the water. Now, the point I want to make here, folks, to enter the water. So the point I want to make here is I'm talking about what the actions actually are and in what sequence they occur in. Okay, going back to the point I made before, trunk position, very minimal rotation, as still as possible, sometimes described as a wobble. So one of the things with trunk position, guys, is we want it to be as static as possible. We want it to be as the core, the base. But sometimes it just with the motion just rotates. You can actually see that here. The body's just slightly rotated this way in order for her to sort of go to the side and breathe. But of course she wants her body to be on the water so she can keep those legs kicking. And talking of legs, what would be the leg action in this case? Well, we could say something like plantar to dorsiflexion of the ankle. And we're going to have repeated flexion of the hip. Now, the reason I write it like that is because, generally speaking, you can see it here, the knees will remain extended. So the feet will work, they'll rotate here, they'll rotate here, and the hip will go from the leg being here to the leg being here to the leg being here to the leg being here, but the knee itself will remain quite static. So the point is, we've got a clear explanation of how those subroutines work. Now let's look at a different one. We've got a footballer here. By the way, this is nice. A motor program is subroutines, generalized movements. They must be stimulated by nerve impulses in order to contract. These contractions must occur in the correct order. So let's look at order in this case. Obviously with swimming, a lot of those things are happening simultaneously. But let's look at preparation. What have we got here? For that leg to go back, we have got things like hip extension. We have got things like knee extension. We have got things like plantar flexion at the ankle. We have got plantar flexion. Now what's going to happen, of course, is that leg's going to start swinging through, and striking this ball. So what would the execution be? I'm just giving you examples. Obviously, you can interpret these slightly differently, but this is what we're going to find. So now we're going to get hip flexion. Now we're going to... actually, I just realised something there. That shouldn't have been knee extension. That should have been knee flexion. And well done anyone who spotted my mistake there. Hip flexion. Now what we're going to get is knee extension. And the reason it would be flexion at the start is because it would be bent, right? It would be like that, ready to kick. So knee extension, and we're going to carry on with plantar flexion. So during the execution, the actual striking phase, the ankle is going to remain down in a good technique. Let's do another one here. Recovery, what does that mean? Recovery is like the follow-through. That's a way to think about it. So what would we have in the follow-through of a kick? So now we're going to have, let's call it hyperflexion, because it's going to go into its most extreme sort of flex state in front of the body. We would carry, would the knee carry on being extended? No, we might end up with some knee flexion. And we might end up with some, let's say that the ankle starts to dorsiflex, even though good technique probably means it stays plantar flex, but never mind. And then finally, folks, let's go to here. Overall efficiency. I'm going to talk here about things like weight transfer. So if we go from weight, it starts. So in phase one, which of course is the preparation, we've got the weight back. Then in phase two, the execution, we've got it over the ball. So the center of mass is over the ball. And in phase three, we've got it forward. Okay, so we've got kind of this weight transfer thing going on. And the point is that all of that stuff, folks, have to happen in a specific order. So we've got an order of 1, 2, 3, and this is kind of happening during that phase, right? It's an efficient movement as we go through that. So that's what we mean by subroutines, and you need to be prepared to kind of have an understanding of those, and we need to apply those to different scenarios. La violencia, the violence. Okay, so one of the things we want to mention about Hot Topic 5 is it's proper simple, but what's hard to it is about reading the question precisely and then answering that precise question. So look, these are basically the potential questions that you've got. What have you got? You've got 7 there. Causes of violence by a performer spectator, consequences to the performer sports society, strategies preventing by a performer and spectator. So that's basically what you could get asked. So as an example of that, let's have a look here. A rugby player throws an uppercut punch during a scrummage. Explain the consequences. Explain the consequences of violence for the performer, okay, and the sport. So we've got 2 things here. We've got to, if you look what we've got here, we're in the consequences section, Okay, and we've got to do this for the performer and the sport. Effectively, we're grouping that. Okay, and we've got the answer here. The player may be cited. The citing system is when video technology is used after someone reports like whistleblowing, and then video is used to see whether it happened, and then suspended for an extended period. Of time. Okay, so that's obviously a consequence to the performer. This can lead to a loss of earnings because, of course, they won't get paid during that period of time potentially, or they could be fined, and a damaged reputation. So we've got there effectively 3 consequences, right? To the performer, we have got the idea that they have been cited, they have been suspended and lose money, and they got damaged reputation of the player. Now, we've got to move on to the sport. Now, we're going to explain that too. The sport could develop a reputation of violence. Now, is it fair to say that of rugby? I mean, I think there has been violence not uncommonly in rugby in the past, and they may have to sell their TV rights. This is the sport, obviously, for less. You know, if rugby was to develop like a thug type reputation, you can imagine a situation where it would get a reputation for violence because it sort of allowed that to happen, and then effectively people wouldn't be willing to pay for that. I actually wonder whether people would be willing to pay more for it. I don't know. But anyway, there's our possible answer structure in that particular case. Oh, and one other thing I should stress here. I just make this little point here. It's kind of a tactical point. Notice that I have made 1 point, 2 points, 3 points for the performer, and then we have made 0.4 and 0.5 for the sport. Now, in this case, our performer has made 5 points, and their split is 3 plus 2. Okay? Now, what you couldn't do with a question like this for 4 marks, what you couldn't do is get 4 marks for saying 4 plus 0. And what I mean by that is only talk about the performer, make 4 points here and no points for the performer. We must get a sort of an even balance to some degree. Now, obviously, it could be 2 and 2. I've gone for 3 and 2 here to go over the top and to give 1 extra in case I don't get that one. By the way, doing 1 extra point is what we call in examining technique. It's called playing for bogey. And if you're not a golfer, you probably wonder what the hell that means. But playing for bogey is the technique of is offering 1 more, sort of going 1 over par. If you don't know what that means, just check with a golfer near you what I'm talking about. Okay, what if the question was about the possible causes of a rugby player acting violently? So exactly the same question, but what happens to the answer? So here we've got basically the same structure of the question. A rugby player throws an uppercut punch during a scrimmage, the same thing, same example. Outline the causes or the possible causes. Now, in order to answer that, we've got sort of like the possible causes down here. And obviously we want to go on this side because it's the performer side. So let's go for what this could be. So they're throwing a punch. So what can we go? I should have put because they have lost 3 successive scrums against the head. And if you again check with a rugby player what that means, against the head, and gets frustrated. So there's my first one, gets frustrated. So there's my first one. So I'll make one other, and then perhaps you can finish off the last 2. So that would clearly be a possible cause for this. Not justifying it, but it's a possible cause. So I've got frustration. That's that one there, right? Now, I'm gonna go for retaliation as my next one. I'll just make space in the previous scrum. I'll get ready for this. In the previous scrum, their opponent bit them. Oh my God, bit them, and they have retaliated. Now, that's a bit grim. I don't know where that came from. Bit Suarez-like, and they have retaliated, and they have retaliated. Okay, so that would, but it's, can you notice that it's not just me putting the answers in the frame of like retaliation, frustration, rivalry, blah blah blah. I'm giving a rugby context to these, and of course I would make 2 more here. I won't sort of take time to do that, but you can imagine, for example, they're having a really poor game and have given away lots of penalties, and again the poor performance leads to an anger. They feel that the referee's decisions to penalise them for penalties are unfair, and they get angry. You know, these are sort of possible reasons, and you've got the equivalent there for the spectator on that side. So guys, just quickly, I won't do too much on this, but just to give you some clear answers. Strategies to prevent violence for performers, what we go for. Harsh punishments, we want the availability of VAR, TMO to show that things are happening, those reviews that can pick things up that get missed. Citing systems like a whistleblowing system, right? Promote non-aggressive role models. I've said this many times in my teaching, that encourage or incentivize being great rather than punishing what's bad. We could also have the idea of performer education, you know, like making sure that people are aware of the dangers of these things, these can happen, and maybe how to ward them off. And we can also help athletes to perform in the realms of arousal control, and you should know a little bit about that already. Initiatives and campaigns, I mean, I'll just leave that as generic. Better policing for spectators, you know, like presence, but also being able to deal with things. We also want to have well-trained stewards. Guys, can I just stress here, if you were just to say stewards in your answer, stewards are those people like with the orange and luminous yellow jackets, football and rugby and cricket grounds or whatever, and they're the people that sort of monitor things. But if you just said have stewards, that's not going to say how things are going to change. You need to say well-trained or better-trained stewards. We want All-Seater Stadium for a calmer environment. We perhaps want alcohol restrictions. I went to hospitality at Wembley recently, and that was not the case. Alcohol restrictions. You might have early kickoffs. The idea here is that early kickoffs, people are a little bit less likely to go bonkers and fight at 12 o'clock in the day. I mean, as we do this, what is it? What's at the weekend? We've got Barcelona, Real Madrid at the weekend, and it's a 3 o'clock in the afternoon kickoff. Is that an example of that, for example? CCTV allows sort of detail to be revealed, and finally, promotion of family atmosphere in grounds as well. Imagine that. Learning theatre is coming up. Perfect time as the train goes past. I really am being waved that here to say we're short on time. So, use an example, describe conservation of angular momentum. It feels very technical, doesn't it, this term, but maybe we can simplify it here. So, angular momentum of a skater performing a spin is what? It's constant. There's another train. Lived close to a train line. It's constant during the spin, according to Newton's first analogue. The skater can what? They can change their rate of spin, which of course, by the way, that's just another way of saying angular velocity. They can change their angular velocity or their rate of spin, angular velocity, and they do that by manipulating, effectively manipulating their position. I haven't left myself much space here. Their position. They can manipulate their position to change their rate of spin, and therefore changing their moment and changing. And I'm going to do this in summary language. MOI, moment of inertia. You should write that out. Moment of inertia at the start of the spin, and I'll explain all this to you. The skater, what does the skater do? At the start of the spin, the skater spreads. I've just seen something funny. Spreads their, teachers in your pack, it says weight spelled incorrectly. Their weight, spreads their weight to increase MOI, moment of inertia. We'll come back to these, don't worry. And then during the spin, crosses their arms. We're literally going to look at this example and it'll all make sense by the end of this. Crosses their arms and legs. I'll just put and legs to decrease MOI, to decrease moment of inertia and increase angular velocity. And increase angular velocity inversely. Finally, at the time for landing, they spread their weight again. To increase MOI, moment of inertia. Now again, you might be thinking, what the hell is this moment of inertia thing? I'm going to explain it to you, which slows their spinning down. Now, the point I want to make, folks, is that despite me doing sort of shorthand, that is the perfect answer to that question. And if you get a question like that, folks, you're going to write that exact language down. Obviously, write out moment of inertia as the difference. Now, what is this all about? Well, first of all, I'm not going to cover those units. They're there for you. What we are going to do is we are going to realize how spin is created. We create angular motion through an eccentric force. What is an eccentric force? It's when a force is applied outside of the center of mass of an object. Now, if we were to do this, this object would undergo, assuming this was the direction of motion, this would undergo topspin. Okay, so this ball would spin around its core, around its axis in this way. And notice, of course, that we've got a situation here where the human body can rotate around the three primary axes. So obviously, we can rotate like this, we can rotate like this, and we can rotate like this. And I've only done each of those in one direction. It can be in the other direction as well. Okay, so there are three primary axes of rotation. But this is what I want you to really focus on here. This is the principle of the conservation of angular momentum. It's written down below for you here. A rotating body will continue in a state of constant angular momentum until an external torque acts. Let me prove it to you. Let me say that we've got a high diver. Okay, a high diver. Think about your favorite high board diver at the top of the platform. Okay, what's going to happen here is in the takeoff phase, they are going to have a high, look what this is, moment of inertia. Moment of inertia is the positioning of one's mass in relation to the axis of rotation. So assuming for a second that this is the axis of rotation of value, this is going to be a somersaulting move in this dive. This person would effectively, what they would do, in order to get a high moment of inertia, they'd put their arms up and they would point their toes. And that would take mass away from this axis, or as much as they can. That would mean they've got a high moment of inertia. But what happens here, folks, is as they begin to tuck and reduce their moment of inertia, what happens? Their angular velocity goes up inversely. So the point here is the reason we tuck during a somersault, generally there are straight somersaults, of course, but the reason we tuck during a somersault is to speed the turn up. Okay, that's what it's done. And what we do is when we're looking to land that somersault again, we will again increase moment of inertia by opening up from the tuck, straightening out. And what's that going to do? It's going to slow down our rotation so we can land without over-rotating. So that inverse relationship is important. Now, the point I want to say to you is that angular momentum, which is conserved, look at that top line on the graph, this is conserved during the whole flight. Angular momentum equals moment of inertia multiplied by angular velocity. So if moment of inertia is high, angular velocity is low. If moment of inertia is low, angular velocity is high. These are inverse to one another during flight, during spin. It could be spin on ice, for example. So let's have a look at this. Let's look at some examples. What have we got here? We've got our high dive. We've got this tuck, exactly what I talked about. So what are they going to do prior to takeoff? They are going to maximize moment of inertia, exactly like we put in that answer. By, how are they going to do it? They're going to do it by spreading mass away, that's mass, not Mars, away from the axis. So at the takeoff, they don't tuck, do they? They spread the arms high. So they're going to raise arms and point toes to get mass away from the axis. And what's the implication of that? Potential angular velocity in flight will be maximized. During flight, they reduce moment of inertia by tucking as tightly as possible. And as a result, angular velocity increases. That's what's going to happen. The diver will do multiple spins if they've done it well enough. Multiple spins. And of course, that's what gets us the higher tariffs, isn't it? We look better. It's more spectacular. What do we do prior to entry? Obviously, we know they straighten out and go for that splashless entry. They up arrow, they increase moment of inertia prior to entry by spreading mass again. In other words, by coming out of the tuck, by spreading mass again. Control the rotation in order to enter the water as straight as possible. That is a description of that, folks. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as that. That's what we're talking about here. I know I'm going fast because we're short on time. Now, again, I tell you what I'll do here, guys. It applies on ice as much as it does in the air. I will allow you guys to fill this one in. It's exactly the same principle, okay? Your teacher has got the perfect answers in their teacher notes. You can have them guide you as to do that. But because we're short on time, I'll leave that one for you to do. But the principles are the same. We're going to have a high moment of inertia. We reduce it to spin fast. We're going to have a high to control the landing. Lovely. Or the stopping.